Hi, Acadiana. Meteorologist Dave Baker here on a Tuesday. It's the first day of July of 2025. So we've reached the second half of 2025. Just now realizing this, that hump is there from June 30th to July 1st. So now we're heading toward New Year's and heading away from New Year's of 2025. Hard to believe 2026 is only 6 months away. Well, we've got a lot to talk about here on Let's Talk Tropics. We don't have any active systems right now, but we do have the potential for some tropical development kind of in our nearshore waters, at least a homegrown system, what we would call it, as a frontal boundary will be diving southward. It could stall over the northern Gulf or the western part of the Atlantic. Models are still a little bit mixed on development, whether there's going to be development or not. And they're also kind of mixed on where that development will be. So we'll kind of go over all that here in just a little while. First of all, another hot one here in the hub city, temperature 88 degrees, but it feels more like 98. All that thanks to that dew point at 75, humidity 66%, and a breeze out of the southwest at around 5 miles per hour. But we do have a lot of Saharan dust in the skies today. So kind of milky out there, not really that deep, dark blue sky that we would normally see during the month of June and July, where we get those afternoon showers and thunderstorms going. But I think for the next couple of days, a little bit of a ridge of high pressure is going to build in aloft, and that's going to prevent some of the lift. But we are going to be socked in with some of that Saharan dust here for the next couple of days. So your allergies might be getting you just a little bit. There's a look at the latest local radar. And for the first time in a long time at noon, we are rain free just about everywhere you go in the Acadiana region. But we do have some bigger thunderstorms that are out in the offshore waters south of the beaches of Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. You've got some spotty showers over central and southern parts of Mississippi, some rain over deep south Texas, and then the frontal boundary that's going to bring that potential for maybe some tropical weather a little bit farther down the road is right about in here, and that's going to continue to slide off toward the southeast over the next 24 hours. Right now, our nearshore waters are looking pretty good for boaters. I know it's really hot out there, but the winds are light out of the southwest and the sea's only running about 1 to 2 feet. And some of the rougher seas that we were seeing there along the Mexican coast are starting to relax a little bit as the remnants of Barry continues to move on in. In the upper levels, though, we've got a big ridge of high pressure at the surface and aloft here out over the Atlantic Ocean. So that big ridge of high pressure will just kind of steer everything kind of off toward the west. Here's that bit of a trough that's going to be sending that front closer to the western part of the Atlantic or the eastern part of the Gulf. And then today we've got more of a ridge of high pressure aloft, and it's a small one. It really only covers East Texas and western portions of Louisiana. So that'll be a focal point for little, if any, rainfall for the next couple of days. And unfortunately, that Saharan dust is out there. It is going to create some pretty sunrises and sunsets over the next couple of days, but during the day, it's those milky white skies, and you combine that with the heat and the humidity. It doesn't look as pretty, and it doesn't look as pretty as it feels because it doesn't feel too pretty out there either. So let's look at the big satellite imagery. And again, the pieces that are coming together. First, we've got kind of an upper level low that's out here off the coast of Florida. That's been there for a while, producing a lot of showers and thunderstorms. All this mess out here is still the remnants of Barry. There's a lot of moisture over the Mexican coast, and we've got some moisture that's been running there along the Rio Grande Valley. But the big player in this is going to be a frontal boundary that's going to dip a little bit farther toward the south. It's currently moving through the Ohio and the Tennessee River valleys right now. And we think by the weekend, it's probably going to stall out somewhere in that area. And you might get a low here, or we might get another low somewhere in here. So we're going to look at those models coming up in just a little bit. There are some of the heavier rains. You can kind of see that upper trough a little bit better with some of that little bit of rotation counterclockwise over Florida. Storms are going to the south here on the east side, rising to the north there on the west side. But again, this is an upper level system. You need things to to be closer to the surface, down toward the ground or the waters, to have any tropical weather develop. So at this point, this is not what we're concerned with becoming a tropical system down the road. It's really more of that front. But with all those heavy rains that are along the Florida Panhandle and the Alabama coast, it looks like it's a little bit better of a day over in Orange Beach compared to where it was yesterday. And then a little further to the east over in Destin, they had a lot of rain there yesterday. It looks like it's kind of a gray one, but not as much rain as what we've been seeing over the past several days. But the National Hurricane Center will continue to watch that area where the front's expected to stall over the western Atlantic or the eastern part of the Gulf. And it is a low end chance, less than 40%. In fact, it's zero over the next 2 or 3 days. But as you go out to about a week, that's where we could see the possibility of some development. And last week's tropical cyclone strike probabilities that go from yesterday, Monday, through next Monday is showing the possibility of some tropical activity there along the East Coast, but you know that it focuses a little bit more out in the Atlantic and a little bit less there over the Gulf. And I really think if we're going to see anything develop, it's probably going to develop there just east of Florida and then start to cruise out into the Atlantic. Might have a little chance for some extra development over the waters of the Atlantic. They're quite warm as you get over toward Bermuda, but if it develops over parts of the Gulf waters and we get some lower wind shear, might be looking at something with those higher water temperatures that are well above normal, but you've also got some higher heat content over the eastern half of the Gulf waters. And what that means is not only is the top of the water very, very warm, but those warm waters go rather deep. So a tropical system can tap into some of that warm water deep below the surface, where if you get that shallow amounts of heat like you see out in the middle part of the Atlantic, it might be 80 degrees right at the surface, but the water gets cold as you go a few feet down. So sometimes tropical systems can churn up some of that cooler water and it doesn't allow them to strengthen. But when you have a lot of heat content here, like what we're seeing over the Caribbean and parts of the Gulf, it can tap into some of that warm water below. So as it churns up those waves and churns up that water, there's still a lot of very warm water available under that to push up toward the surface, which can give it a little more fuel. So occasionally you can get some rapid intensification when you get a system go over an area of high heat content. Now, the thing that's choking it right now, you see that upper low that's just off the Florida coast. You've got some decent wind shear over the Florida Peninsula, and then you've also got some decent wind shear that's associated with the front itself that's now starting to move here across the middle part of the country. There's that upper low right there. And so you've got some high wind shear over the Florida Peninsula right now, but we do expect that to change a little bit going into Friday. So this is early in the morning on the 4th of July. So you notice the difference. If you look there at Florida and the northeastern Gulf, you see that high wind shear today, but as you go into Friday, it starts to drop off just a little bit. As you see, this area here has some slightly lower wind shear, and that also extends out here in the Atlantic too. So those are the two areas where we think there might be the chance for some development. So we'll go through the global models real quick here. And the GFS model going toward the end of the week has a little low pressure over the northeastern Gulf, might be a tropical depression, but then it kind of fizzles out and it doesn't really do anything over the next several days. Meanwhile, the Euro model, very similar, but you don't see much of a closed area of low pressure. So far, the Euro is not predicting any tropical weather, at least going into the 4th of July weekend. Maybe a tropical depression on a blip there in the middle of this loop, but really inconclusive. Now, the Canadian model's actually been generating more of a low pressure area over the Atlantic, and you can see that there. And as it pushes off toward the northeast, kind of riding up the coast, and there for a while, it looks like it deepens enough that it could be classified as a tropical storm, but it is a little bit different than the GFS and the Euro solutions, where it focuses a little more on development over the Atlantic rather than over the Gulf. And finally, the Icon, which only goes out 7 days, is a very similar scenario with the front settling in, and you see a low pressure area develop, but it just kind of meanders around there. It doesn't really cross over in the Atlantic. The last run showed some Atlantic action, and if you look there in those last shots, you see a little tropical system maybe trying to work its way around the Bermuda High beyond the 4th of July, going into the middle part of next week. So that's something new that I'm seeing in the models there. There are some tropical waves that are moving from the east, but at this point, I'm not seeing anything that looks interesting enough like the Icon to actually develop a system. So the GFS is going with the depression. The Euro, I would say no storm on there, although there was a little blip on one frame of a low pressure area. So that's kind of inconclusive right now. Canadian is still going with a tropical storm, but having the system develop on the Atlantic side and then lift northward along the east coast. And then the Icon has a really sloppy looking depression, maybe over the eastern Gulf, then kind of meandering over the Florida Peninsula, perhaps getting over the Atlantic briefly, but then kind of curving its way back toward the southeastern coast. So inconclusive, but we do have three models, at least at this hour. The most recent runs are showing that we could see some tropical development there. I did want to, since we're so close to the 4th of July weekend, one of the things that I wanted to do is kind of show you some of our shorter range models, our high resolution models. So this is the NAM, which is based off the GFS, but if you notice there in this bottom right hand corner, I'm kind of highlighting it green there. It only goes out to 60 hours. So it's only 5 days, rather 4 days that we're looking at there. So, or 5 days rather. So 60 hours, you can see as we go. And if you look up here at the top at July the 3rd, almost July the 4th, it takes up right there to the late evening hours of July the 3rd. But you see a little bit of a low there. And again, this is based on the GFS. Then you've got some of the more AI stuff that gets thrown in there. This is the FV3. This is the high resolution model. And again, you can see as I kind of sweep this back and forth between July 3rd, this is over the course of July 3rd, and these give you hourly updates. It's not 3 or 6 like the GFS. But you do see the rains there over Florida, maybe a little bit of a turn, but you're not seeing anything significant, at least at that point in time. The HRRR doesn't go out quite as far, but the mesoscale, at least the shorter range, high resolution solutions are showing at least some kind of a depression, maybe trying to form either in the extreme northeastern Gulf or more likely over the western part of the Atlantic. So nothing to worry about locally, but I know a lot of people like to do traveling over the 4th of July weekend. At this point, it looks like that front's going to stall. So you probably are going to see some rougher seas there along the Florida Panhandle, probably a little bit worse along the east coast of Florida, Georgia, and into the Carolinas. But that frontal boundary, that moisture, and all of that instability is going to be hanging there throughout the weekend. So unfortunately, there's not going to be too many good beach days. Hopefully, the heaviest amounts of rain, though, stay well in the offshore waters. Anything else out there? Well, we've got some thunderstorms there near Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and down toward Panama. Kind of an old tropical wave that's been working its way westward across the Caribbean Sea over the past several days. A lot of Saharan dust in the Caribbean right now. The islands are clear, the Windward and Leeward Islands, all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago, then the bigger islands of Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and over toward Puerto Rico and Jamaica, even seeing a pretty nice day out there. And out in the tropical Atlantic, we do have some pretty vigorous tropical waves, at least for the early part of July. Those are moving off to the west. But remember, last year we had Beryl that formed as a hurricane and became a Category 5 hurricane right about this time of the year and right about where that particular tropical wave is out here in the Atlantic. So at this point, models aren't showing anything developing out there, But just keep in mind, July is where we start to see different parts of the Atlantic Basin kind of wake up as we get deeper and deeper into hurricane season. One last look, I do want to just show you on the Pacific side that we have Hurricane Flossie. Winds now are at 85 miles per hour with that hurricane. It's going to continue to hold its own for a day or so. And then as it heads over toward Baja and the Gulf of California, we will be seeing some weakening as it moves into some colder waters. But Flossie is the only named system that's out there. And we also got a lot of moisture there in the Pacific. So we may have another tropical system try to fire up here within the next week or so. Back on the Atlantic side, remember we've now crossed over, turned the page to the month of July. So June, we really have mostly just the northern Gulf and the western part of the Atlantic, and the Yucatan Channel is where we see most of our tropical development. But during the month of July, you start to see a little bit more action from the mid-Atlantic states pushing out into the Atlantic Ocean, but also the Eastern Caribbean and the far Western Atlantic near the Windward Islands starts to open up for business. And as we get into August, just about everything is open for business. So get ready, because even though we've only had 2 named storms, which is pretty close to the average for a hurricane season by the time we reach the month of July, there is going to be quite a few more storms firing up over the next several months. And you can see that basically with the frequency graph that we have here. June, fairly quiet. July, fairly quiet, maybe a little more active. It doesn't seem to be quite as active on the Gulf Coast as it is in the Caribbean and maybe out in the mid part of the Atlantic. But once you start to cross over into August and especially into September, that's when things really start to ramp up. So that's why we tell you to get ready for hurricane season well ahead of the season's beginning, but you still have a little time in June and July to grab some of those extra supplies to be ready for when hurricane season really starts to kick into high gear in August and September. And remember, over the last few years, things have started up a little bit later, but they've continued a little bit longer into the hurricane season. We had a number of named storms in October and November back in 2024. So that's the reason why we tell you to be ready now when everything is nice and quiet. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. You can also hear my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. Any updates on Facebook and X, generally radars or any tropical weather updates that might be there, or any emergency stuff that needs to be out, will be on our social media pages. And a big thank you to everyone who's watching the show today, whether you're here live or whether you watch the recorded version later on in the day. But if you wouldn't mind, hit that subscribe button, get on there for Acadiana Weather Today right here on YouTube, and that way you'll be ahead of the game during hurricane season. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you for Acadiana Weather Today on Wednesday morning at 7 o'clock. See you then.